Welcome, welcome, your backup plan tribe, to another awesome show this week, Unraveling Grief, Healing Strategies for the Brokenhearted. Now, after grief, when we're in grief, I like to think that we would have some sort of strategy to kind of get over it. I don't think we ever get over it, though, but we can assist the broken heart. Because there is an old song and an old poem that says we can die from a broken heart. So very, very true. And I'm sure that we have seen that during COVID. We saw that quite a bit with some relationships, some older, long-term husband and wives. So welcome to our show today. My name is Tina Ginn. I am the creator and developer of your Backup Plan app and the best-selling author of In the Blink of an Eye. Just like that, your life changes in the blink of an eye, in a second, in a flash. I'm also an emergency preparedness coach, and I'd like to think that, we have real-life stories on our show with real-life people. Our guests talk about their tragedy, their ever-changing, life-changing moment that has changed them forever. And that being said, our special guest is coming to us today from Australia. I'm so excited to have her. She is a best-selling author and a confidence coach and a speaker, and her name is Lunaria, and I'm so excited to have her on our show today to talk about the brokenhearted and how to get over those broken hearts. And I'm sure we'd all like to know what the special, is there a code? Is there a secret? Because I'd like to have one as well. So let's get the party started, and I'll see you in a flash.
In the blink of an eye, life can change dramatically. On our podcast, Talking Taboo with Tina, we delve into these life-altering events with celebrities, authors, and everyday people just like you. You'll also discover your Backup Plan app, a life-organizing tool designed to prepare you for any unexpected circumstance. It's your safety net, taking the sting out of tragedy. Imagine a Plan B that ensures your finances are safe, even in the worst-case scenario. But it doesn't end there. Join our vibrant Facebook group for free webinars on backup planning and secure your future today.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome. So, welcome, Lunaria, Gaia from Australia. I'm so happy to have you on our show today. Thank you so very much. I see you are a speaker, a confidence coach, a best-selling author, and you have a second book coming out as well. And I'm excited to hear all about this whole journey that you've been on with your brother.
Thank you so much for having me, Tina. It really is an honor. What a very special topic, obviously close to my heart and close to so many of our hearts when we go through this grief experience. It can be, well, for most of us, it's absolutely harrowing. So it's a pleasure to be here talking about it. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for coming on. And I'm excited to hear some tips, because let's face it, it's the hardest thing that you'll ever have to endure in life. And so many really aspects, from a pet to a family member, to a friend, to a parent, to child, a spouse, so many things. So where did it all start for you?
Oh, he was my hero, my big brother. I'm the youngest of 5, and I'm number 5, and my brother was number 4, and we were 19 months apart. So as you can imagine, we grew up incredibly close. Now, it's obviously not always the case for siblings born that close together, but we were just like we were 2 peas in a pod. And as a little girl who often grows up faster than a little boy, we looked the same. So we looked the same. We kind of grew up at the same kind of rate. We were only a couple of years different in school. And we were just twins. You know, we were
Yeah.
often confused for twins. We looked the same. We lived in each other's pocket. We were the best of friends for so many very, very years. You know, it was just him and I. What it felt like, even though we had our three other brothers, they were much older than us. So my brother number 3 was 7 years older than me, and then number 2 is 11 years older, and number 3 is 13 years older than me. So for John and I only being 19 months apart, we were just taken everywhere together and wrapped up together. And even in our teenage years, when, you know, he sort of hit puberty and I wasn't very cool to hang out with anymore, I think that even then he was incredibly protective of me. And through high school, you know, no one could bully me because he was the one that was there to take care of me. And when we hit our 20s, we were living different lives. He was doing his thing, I was doing my thing, and we didn't always necessarily live in the same state or the same country at times. But he was always my Johnny. He was always, he was always Ron to me, is what I would call him. For some reason, rather than calling him John, I would call him Ron. And there was just this beautiful love that we shared. He was a soulmate of mine, effectively. And look, I don't think I'll ever forget it. I was going for a run one morning. It was a Saturday morning. I was going for a run. I was living in Melbourne, Australia, and him living in Canberra, Australia, about 8 hours north. And I got a phone call from my mum at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Very unusual to hear from my mum at that time of day. And I answered the phone with my headset in because I'd been running, and, hey, you know, good morning, Mum, what's up? Like, what's going on? And you know how, Tina, you know when something's wrong as soon as you hear their voice?
Yeah.
You have that moment where everything in your being just tells you that something's wrong. And
yeah, it's like it goes blank almost.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And she says to me, you know, hi, darling. And her voice cracks, and I was like, what is it? And I know my mum really well, and we're quite close as well. So I was like, what is it? And, you know, she did her best at the time. She said, John's been diagnosed. I was like, John's been diagnosed with what? What's happened? And through her own tears and her own, you know, grief already, she said, John's been diagnosed with a brain tumor.
And he was, what would you say he'd be?
He was 28.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, he was 28. I was 27 at the time, and him 28. And of course, everything then goes into overdrive for me. Everything was like, okay, well, what now? How bad is it? Like, is that a big deal? Like, you know, we live in, you know, at the time, it was 2011, end of 2010, actually. It's like, you know, like, people recover from that kind of stuff all the time. What needs to happen? Like, you know, is it chemo? What are we doing? Like, you know, what's the plan? And my mum was a mess. And effectively, she's like, we don't know yet, but you better come to Canberra. So soon enough, I was on a plane. That was December. It was about the 9th. Oh, yeah, there we go. About the 13th of December, actually, 13th of December, 2010. I head up to Canberra. And that's how bad it was. It was like, okay, cool, maybe we need to rally the troops and everyone needs to come together. And he had been behaving strangely for some time. And what I mean by strangely is that, you know, he might arrive at home, you know, drive home, sit in the car and be there for 3 hours.
Oh,
like sitting in the car for 3 hours. And I didn't live with him, of course. And he was living with just, you know, housemates at the time. So, you know, like we're talking mid kind of 20s-ish, late 20s. Maybe we don't have that kind of sense of awareness, like housemates maybe not necessarily knowing that that's behaviors on, you know, out of the ordinary, you know, not having someone necessarily to kind of pick up on that kind of stuff. He would have showers until the water ran cold and then be there for another hour. And it's only kind of in hindsight that we look back on those events and realize that the brain tumor was severely impacting him. And I remember arriving and, it was quite, he had moments where he was entirely himself and then moments where he would just blank out. He would ask him, what do you want to eat, John? And he'd be like, yeah, sounds good. Like, but what do you want? And he would say, oh, yeah. So there were questions that we were asking him, and it was a really difficult time because his behavior was so challenging. He looked like him, he sounded like him, he functioned like him in terms of visual. And if you were just asking him how his day was, he'd be like, yeah, good. And he could answer. He could give these answers that were, it was as though he was a bot.
Yeah.
In 2011, we may have not known what that is, but now in 2024, we know how a bot responds. You know how they just give these automated response of what they think that they should give, but then when you give a little bit of context, they can't go any deeper than that.
Like that's Alexa like. Sometimes when she answers you.
Yeah. She gives you these kind of canned responses that don't have any real substance to them. And that was what it was like with him.
So it was obviously where it was situated in his brain then.
Yeah, correct. So it's affecting his personality, which so now, and I'll just do a complete leap for a second. Now I'm really hyper aware that if somebody's behavior is starting to change in a very strange way, I'm kind of hyper aware, particularly if they're coupled with headaches, because he had headaches his whole life, but coupled with headaches, they were coupled with very, very strange behavior. I never knew that could be brain tumor symptoms.
Yeah.
Why is he acting so strange? He also, historically for himself, he used to smoke a lot of dope. So for a lot of us, we just assumed that he was back on the dope again, was it. And that it was kind of making him weird. Cool. Like he's always been a bit of a loose cannon. It's probably just the dope that he's on. I mean, in hindsight, the behavior was so totally different that it was never going to be that. And ironically, he wasn't on it at all. It turned out that it was this, massive a brain tumor. And so...
And where was it situated?
Yeah, so I think there's these really standout moments, Tina, of this whole time where he, from diagnosis to death, where this one specific time where I kind of... Look, of course, it's going to be my viewpoint of this. It's like I almost watched the doctor kill him. So there were lots of back and forth. There was a lot of rallying around the hospital with him. It's in the lead up to Christmas. It's the 13th of December. That time of year is pretty hectic at the best of times, let alone all of our disjointed family coming together. My father had got remarried only 6 months earlier. It was pretty chaotic in my family. And I remember this doctor coming in and he tells this 28-year-old, I kind of want to say kid, even though, he wasn't a child, but a 28-year-old young man. And he literally, this is what the doctor said to him. He said, John, you have a brain tumor that runs from here across to here. It's across both of your lobes, and you will never regain the use of your bowels and bladder, because by that point he'd become incontinent. You'll never regain the use of your bowels and bladder. You will never drive again. And it's pretty likely that you're going to end up in a vegetable state.
Oh, that quickly. Did it start on one side and then the other, or it was just there?
Effectively, they said it's a stage 4 brain tumor. It's a stage 4 brain tumor. It goes across both the frontal lobes, and effectively, it's inoperable. That's what we were told at that point. Tina, I watched any part of him that was wanting to survive. Wanting to survive. Any part of him that was going to fight for this. I watched it all just like that. That light was snuffed out in that moment. He started having seizures very, very, it was like soon after that, like that afternoon, he started having seizures in the hospital. Yeah, where he would black out. And it's like he couldn't, like whatever spark of life could have been there, I feel like in that moment was lost. And in hindsight, I can look back and I'm like, that's the moment. Because for John, he was such a liver of life, such a liver of life. He was outrageous and always happy and laughing and smiling. Like, it doesn't mean that he was without anger and grief and pain, but he got amongst it. He was always the life of the party. He was a happy guy. He lived and he was full. And to have that doctor say to him what he did in the way in which he did, can you imagine telling a 28-year-old that you're going to be incontinent for the rest of your life? You'll never drive again, and you're likely to be a vegetable.
An 80-year-old doesn't even want to hear that.
And I mean, truth in it? Yeah, I guess so. I guess that was the truth. I guess that was the truth. But I think that there's something to be said, knowing what I know now about our minds, about our focus, about our capacity for healing. There is a fine line there, I think, Tina, between diagnosing and giving a death sentence.
Do you think he could have caught it sooner? Do you think he could have?
Look, I've looked back on that time many times throughout the last, what are we now, 13 years since he died. And certainly in that first 12 months, it was like we should have done more because we got a second opinion. We got a second opinion. Well, like myself, I was 27 at the time and the youngest of the family, but I was fighting for him. Myself and his kind of on again, off again girlfriend. She was a very dear friend of mine. And she'd been kind of part of our family and with us for 10 years. So, they would have got married kind of deal. She and I were both in disability care. And so we were very strong advocates for him at the time to making sure that he was getting the care that he needed. And we were fighting for a second opinion. And my parents ended up getting a second opinion, but within the same hospital. We didn't go to a bigger hospital. We didn't go to a, like Canberra is a relatively small city. We didn't go to a big city with really specialized care because the doctor said there was no point. And so we didn't. And so sometimes, Tina, I've wondered, like, if we would have taken him to Sydney or to Melbourne, to some of the biggest hospitals, if we would have taken him across the globe, and done more research, could we have saved him? And look,
who knows?
I think that's part of the grief process of that denial.
Well, it is. It's the why him first. Mm-hmm. Well, why did you take him? And why? And I guess it's.
Could we have done something more?
Have done something? Could we have seen it earlier?
Yeah, and I think for many of us,
that's a hard one.
Yeah, I think that I remember his friend who was living with him at the time, dear friend of him, like a friend of him since high school, and I remember meeting up with him just a few years ago, and him just crying and saying, "Please forgive me." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, he goes, "I was there. I should have seen it. I should have told people. I should have. And Tina, what I just really realized is that we can't go back.
No.
And living in what could have been only destroys us more.
It does. And I think on the times where it is caught early, it's usually that I've noticed or seen, especially from our shows that we do, or cancer is kind of the same, is when something else happens, then you catch it. Like a really bad bike accident or something, and then they find that on top of what had just happened. But then they catch it early. It's like a gift, really, from God, that
Yeah.
that something happens to bring you in to get something else fixed. But when you don't catch it, it's tough to say it any other way.
And look, the size of it, the position of it, like, I have theories, Tina. I really do. I have theories, and I'm a strong believer, and even more so since his passing, I'm a strong believer that our path is laid out for us. And that I think for all of us, including him, he died exactly when he was meant to, as it was planned. It's funny, about 18 months maybe before his death, before any of the behavior changes, him and I were in Portugal together. And he was on a surf camp, and I was visiting him because I was living in London. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and we're having one of those big D&M conversations, and, deep and meaningful. We were connecting, like we had done for so many years. And I don't know why I said this, Tina. I don't know where it came from. I don't know how it made any sense at the time. But I remember looking at him in this conversation before we knew anything about anything, before he was sick, nothing. And I just said to him, you know what, brother? If for whatever reason there was only one spot on Earth for us, there was only one spot, I would want you to have it, is what I said to him. You take the spot on Earth. And,
That's a very strange comment.
Such a strange comment. And I didn't realize it was strange at the time. Like, why would there only be one spot?
Yeah.
And I think when I look back, like 18 months later, he then gave that spot to me. And him and I were always, as I said, very special and very close, like soulmates. And I have a distinct memory of being about 10, and we were cuddled up in his bedroom, and we could see the Christmas tree lights. We can see the Christmas tree lights out through the door, out next to the fireplace, like very Hollywood. We're there, we're cuddling, and I remember him pulling me close to me and saying to me, "We're angels, you and I." And I I said to him, "I know." And he said, "We're here to do beautiful things on this planet. We're here to make change." And I was like, "Are we?" And he's like, "Yep." And again, a strange memory that he would tell me that we're angels, him and I specifically were angels. And then, 20 years later, this moment where I tell him that if there was only one spot Earthside, that he should have it. And then a year later, him to give that spot to me. I can so clearly see, and I was thinking about this just last night, I can so clearly see that I was built to be the one on Earthside. He wouldn't have survived my death. Yeah, I don't think he would have survived my death. I think that if it would have been the opposite is true, I don't think he could have done what I've done here. But he's doing what he needs to do there. Purpose. If that makes sense. We are still on mission. We are still angels. We are still here to help
do something,
bring to the planet. Well, yeah, help to do what we're here to do, to serve. We're still doing it. We're still in team. There was just something needed to happen, actually, to me. And I know that, kind of can always sound a bit narcissistic, but his death for me was the greatest gift. It was so profoundly heart-wrenching and hard for me that it completely transformed my life. It completely changed my direction and created something in me that has compelled me and continues to compel me to fulfill the mission that he and I, to help others. Absolutely. To come here to do what we came here to do.
That's funny because on our show, I always talk about if we can make one change from one person in a show, I've done my job.
Yeah, so, amen.
Because that's a great thought. I guess you could say it's a great way to move forward. but it doesn't help the hurt and the pain,
No,
right?
no, it does not.
So,
He got diagnosed on the 13th of December, and by January 9, he was dead.
wow,
Yeah,
that's
which is
crazy. Well, it's good
almost
for
unheard of.
suffering part.
Definitely.
Didn't suffer long. I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But geez,
Beautiful.
doesn't give much time to families that need to have everything organized, does it?
No.
I know
No,
my
it definitely wasn't organised.
no, and that's what happened with a good friend of mine, and that's what happened with the app. Is she went into the hospital for tests and she never came out. She had
Wow.
stage 4 lung cancer and died in 6 weeks from the time
Yeah.
she went in for tests. So they had
Like that.
no time to organize anything.
No.
Maybe 2 weeks period of time where they could still talk to each other, and after that, she, even if she wanted to tell you, it was more like, I'm not interested in
Yeah.
telling you. That's the difference it makes. So, before we forget, remind everybody, Lunaria's information is down below in the description box for everybody, and also a link to your page and your social media. So if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can reach you there. Also me, because I know how to get a hold of her too. But thank you. And so after all of this happens so quickly, how do you clean up somebody's mess that's left behind?
Yeah, I think that's so part of when you talk about, something like your backup plan app. I think that, when it happens so suddenly, and it so often does, let's face it, like death isn't clean most of the
No.
time. It isn't like, I mean, when people get older, there's, like my grandma died a couple of years ago, and she was a trio with my brother and I. Her death was, like, I don't even want to call it sad. It was complete. It was necessary. She's 93. She's lived a great life. She's, we know that she's on the way out. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful transitionary experience, right? So different in our family from his death, which was the last big death that we experienced. When you're old, she's in a nursing home. Things would have been in place for a long period of time. My dad had access to all the bank accounts for a long period of time. All of that was clean. When people are old, it is definitely a, we
easier
expect it, so we
time.
plan for it. Way easier. But when we're young, and I'm not even just talking 20s or, children, but even my age, I'm 40, 50, 60, even 70 these days, I think that we can be so unprepared, and we're unprepared practically is what we're talking about here. How do we close your Facebook account? How do we, and I don't have any of this set up if I die suddenly. How do I access your bank accounts? How do I do all of that? Do you have life insurance? Do you have any insurance in general? Where do I access it? And I think with my brother, what added to the difficulty was that it's a tragic loss. So we're all in survival mode, like complete survival mode. It's complete shock. We're devastated. We have no capacity to think straight.
No,
And yet,
it's like your brain disappears. It literally does.
yeah. And yet there's bills to pay and things to organize and cars to sell. And I mean, fortunately in this case, he didn't own anything particularly. Like, it's not like he had a mortgage, or by the end, he wasn't really working. So it's not like we had to do any of that kind of stuff. But, even just his finances, because within his superannuation is what it's called in Australia. It's like a 401k. That's the American version. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but it's it's a future planning, like a retirement planning thing that have in Australia. Contained within that, he had life insurance. But because it wasn't allocated to someone specifically, it was just generalized, it was taxed. So, you know, my parents, I think that, you know, the government ended up getting, I think, about like something absurd, like 40% of what could have gone to my parents to clear debts, because he had credit card debts, that kind of stuff, or could have gone to that, which it did a bunch of, but, you know, 40% of it went to the bloody government.
Yeah.
And that, for my parents, I really remember feeling like a really big kick in the face,
Yeah.
because, you know, paying for the funeral suddenly, sorting things out, like what do we do with the car? What do we do with these possessions? All that kind of stuff is just the last thing that we want to do.
Yeah.
And yet we have to.
I know, it's awful. You have to, but you don't want to.
That's right. You know, I suppose, is it fortunate, unfortunate for me? I don't know. You know, for me, I wasn't living near my family at all. So I was living with my partner in Melbourne, who had only met my brother once. So I wasn't around any people who have the history of my brother, who we could talk about and share with and grieve with. And my very best friend was his, you know, partner. So she's going through the same thing, and we found it, and same as my mum, we found it very, very difficult to support one another, because we didn't have the capacity to give anymore. We didn't have any room to give, because we had to hold ourselves. So it was a very isolating and a really difficult time, because it was so
Very
personal
lonely.
to so many of us. Very lonely, yeah, because, you know, my parents have just lost a child. My best friend has lost a spouse, for want of a better term. Who
Share
do I
and
lean
vent
on?
to. Yeah, who do you get support from?
And of course I can get support from those people, but they need support too.
Yeah.
And there were so many fractures in my family at that point in time, and I was living 800 kilometers away, and it was, I mean, it was, you know, I look back on it, it's the hardest thing. Just the hardest thing in those. Look, I want to be really honest with everybody here. If they've never experienced, you know, deep grief, you know, I remember Googling it, wanting to know how long it's going to take. I was like, okay, cool. Like, I understand that grief needs to come, but I've never done it before, right? So
That's it.
Great.
3
I was
weeks.
like, but even if it was like, is it 12 months? Like, is that how long it's going to take? Is it like, how long do I need to do this for? How long do I need to be broken for? Effectively was what it was. And I would try to Google it and find out. And the internet, even, you know, 13 years ago, the internet isn't what it wasn't
now.
then what it is today. Like, it's, you know, I searched everywhere trying to find stories about sibling grief, young sibling grief, and I found that really difficult to find. These days I don't think I would, but back then, like, there were lots of people talking about spouse death, there were lots of people talking about parental death, there were lots of people talking about child death, but not sibling. And you know what I really realized, that I remember it just shaking me to my core, is that because I was younger than him, Tina, I never existed in the world without him.
Right.
My mother did. All of my brothers did. His girlfriend did. Everybody. Actually, now that I think about it, I was the only person in the world who had never existed without him in it. Everybody else had had some time before he was born or before they met him. But I came into the world and there he was, and he was by my side from the moment that I was born until the moment that he died. All of a sudden, half of me had left.
Yeah. It's like somebody ripped off your leg and your arm.
It was just such a, he was so ingrained in me, in who I was, in my whole identity. I did not know how to exist without him in the world. And so I had to learn how. I had to learn how to exist in the world now that he wasn't there.
That's crazy. And, I don't think there's still a lot of siblings grief out there, even now. And
Even
that's
now.
why I thought it was really, really important to do this and get your story out there, because it is something. It is something. Like, it really is a thing.
And huge.
Even though some of us hate our brothers and sisters, I'm sure, But there are some that are really, really close. So, that's like,
and of course, I think
part
with grief, and I think with with all grief, it's going to depend on your relationship, the way that it is, and it doesn't mean that if you've had a good relationship, it's going to be bad, the grief, or you've had a bad relationship, so the grief's going to be like easy. There's when you've lost someone that there was a lot of regret with, that level of grief can be incredibly difficult. For me, it was exactly that. I don't think we talk a lot about sibling death.
No.
And what that's like.
I think it truly is like part of you leaving with the him. I really think it's like ripped, like you just can't be whole anymore for some reason. So how do you tell the listeners how to be whole? Like, how do you be happy from this? Find other reasons, I guess.
I think that if I go back, I think what's really key here is that we've got to let the grief do its thing. Initially, I think that for me, there was a whole bunch of, and I wouldn't have used this word at the time, but in hindsight, I do now. It's a whole bunch of surrender. Like it took over me. It took over me, and it was interesting, Tina, because up until that point in my life, from my relationship with myself, I had a really poor relationship with myself up until that time, and I had suppressed a whole bunch of grief in my life, a whole bunch of trauma, a whole bunch of pain. So when I opened the floodgates, or when the floodgates were burst open through his death, it felt like all grief, everything that I had suppressed in my life was coming out and through me. And I remember a mentor of mine at the time just said, it takes as long as it takes, and be okay to crumble. And I wasn't okay to crumble. I'll be really honest with everybody here. I wasn't okay. But honestly, I had no choice. And I unraveled completely. Yeah. And in the unraveling, in the allowing grief to transform me, even if I was a very resistant participant in that, in the unraveling, I fell into nothingness. And I think that people are really afraid of that. Like, what happens if I fall into nothingness? I think that if we let ourselves fall into nothingness and we allow ourselves to rebuild, then, like I think you said before, the grief never goes away. I don't think we ever get over it. The way that I like to describe it is, in the beginning, grief was so big it took over me. It was so much bigger than me. There was, it was the whole world, the grief was, every day, every moment, and as time goes on, as the healing goes on, what I've discovered, particularly, 13 years on, is that the grief is still as big as what it was back then. It's just that I've grown bigger than it now.
I like
so
that.
So it's not that the grief is smaller, I'm bigger. So it takes up less space in my being now, not because it's smaller, but because I've grown beyond it. And I don't want to skip over the harrowing, the hardship. I don't want to skip over the hardship, because it was quite possibly, it was the worst thing I had ever experienced up to date at that point in time in my life. It happens to be the biggest gift that I've ever experienced, but it was most certainly the hardest thing that I had ever done.
Well, and I'm sure in the first year, someone had said it's a gift, you would have said, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's a slap in the face at that point in time. I mean, to be grateful for it now. Even now, a lot of people would find that quite challenging, that I can look back on that. And
Yeah.
for him,
And I think I like how you said that, because it does take over you. For some reason, it does. Because when you go to sleep, it's on your mind. When you wake up and you open your eyes, it's on your mind.
Yeah.
When you work, it's on your mind. When you like you drive, it's on your mind. That's what's so
everywhere.
frustrating about it. Because you just like to package it up and put it somewhere else for a while,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
bring it out every now and then when you feel like dealing with it.
Yeah.
But you can't.
Doesn't work that way. Grief has its own plan.
But what I did like is that over time, you do become bigger than it. And you start realizing the triggers, and you start realizing the moments that something affected you or your thought, where it's not on your mind 100% of the time. To get to that stage is welcoming. That's for sure. Especially to find happiness, like you have
Happiness,
talked about in your book. Do you want to talk about your book?
Yeah, I think, look, giving ourselves permission to be happy on the other side, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
I think that, and it's cliche and people say it all the time, and sometimes it just feels like, it just feels like words. But for him, I think that part of the gift for me is that he was such a lover of life that for me it was like, well, I want to honor that. Yeah. I want to honor the lover of life. I want to honor life, and I want to not necessarily be an example or put heaps of pressure on myself that I have to be happy, but to at least
want to be
that
happy.
A red hot shot. Want to be happy. Correct. That well, I'm alive. I think that that's the thing, that we can. How many of us walk around half dead anyway? The book that I have just recently written, that will be out actually May 23rd, the 23rd of May.
Oh, that's exciting.
I can now speak of it. I actually have a launch date. So the global online book launch for Get Happy and Free will be the 23rd of May. So look, it's my second book, and full transparency, I don't talk about grief. It's not in association with that. But what it is about how do we not let the circumstances of our life, the outside circumstances and the variations that come from it, be the determining factor for our happiness? Because if we are relying upon the circumstances in our life going the way that we want them to in order for us to be happy, we are at the mercy of something that's forever going to change. And that lack of control will lead us to unhappiness. And really, the whole premise of the book is, how do you cultivate, how do you create the internal happiness, the stuff that goes on inside? How do you decide what meaning you place on the events in your life? How do you control your thoughts? How do you translate your emotions and be in charge of the internal world? Because you cannot be in charge of the external world. And I think that the last 13 years, the journey that I've experienced from the death of my brother is that more and more and more and more and more. I couldn't do anything about the fact that he died.
No.
But I can do something about the fact that I'm living. And do I want to just be alive, or do I want to live? And honestly, that's what changed it for me. I don't want to work in a job that doesn't satisfy me. I don't want to hate myself, because I did. I hated myself, eating disorders, self-harm. That's what my first book is about learning how to love myself and love my body. That's what Perfectly Imperfect is all about. already available across Amazon and Audible and all that jazz. It's a bestseller. It came out 2.5 years ago. So, my whole life since his death has been about how do I live? How do I truly live? For the sake of life, even, Tina. Just for the sake of living, rather than this half-assed mediocrity that I think so many of us, we're afraid. We're afraid to live. We're afraid of what people think. We're afraid of being judged. We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of being miserable. Yet in the process of hiding from all of that, we're miserable anyway. So how do we get the courage to live our lives? Knowing full well, I think that's what changed really hugely for me, knowing full well that you're going to die. Like, none of us get out of here alive. Life is a death sentence. Like, it's a terminal illness where we all know how this ends. And I think ever since I turned 29, which was a year older than he got to live, I think that really shifted things. That 2 years of deep grief, of deep pain, on the day that I became older than him, I think that there was a real catalyst in my thinking around, not that I'm on borrowed time, but this could, as you say, in a blink of an eye, this can go. And the message that I really want to maybe leave everybody with, or certainly drive home for everybody here, is that everything can change in a blink of an eye. But don't let that make you scared. Let that be the motivation, the inspiration for you to live. Because you don't know. You don't know. You don't know how many breaths you have. Before his death, I had never thought about it, but what I realized is that I made an assumption that I would get old. And I think that so many of us assume that we're going to get old. And maybe we begrudge that. We begrudge, I turned 40 last year. Oh, gosh, I'm 40 now. I will never begrudge a birthday. Like really? I'm alive, and my brother only had 28 birthdays. He never got to the 30. He never got to the 40. And every wrinkle that comes on my face, and every bit of gravity that comes through my skin, and it's not always pleasant to be alive. I don't always love it. There's lots of crummy things that can happen in our life, but this is now. You're living. You're here. And so the second book is about teaching you how to cultivate your internal happiness. How to actually come from inside out. Yeah.
And if you could say something to yourself back 12 or 13 years ago, what would you have said?
It's really interesting. I think that we want to, at large, we want to be able to comfort someone who's in grief. We want to be able to soothe some of the pain.
Or take some of it away.
And we want to do that, but we can't. And I think, a dear friend of mine, her father died last year. And I'm going to say to myself 13 years ago what I recently said to her. There are no words. There's nothing that I can say. This is awful. And I see you in the pain. And it's awful, and it hurts, and it sucks, and it's unfair. And I'm with you. Because, Tina, I think that's we wish that there are words of comfort, but there's not. And I think that when it comes to grief, if we can stop trying to stop the person from being in pain, because you can't. It's impossible. No. It's like trying to stay dry in a storm. You can't. Shelter's not there. But yeah, I'm with you.
I like that.
It's obviously spoken to something within you, Tina.
Yep. Very nice.
Yeah. Just be there. Sit in the shit with the people when they're going through it. Hold their hand and love them. There's nothing to be done. There's nowhere to go. There's no change to occur. This is awful, and I'm sitting next to you in it.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's right. I like
acknowledge the pain, and don't try to change it. I'm just.
Well, you can't. You wish you could.
Right. And that's the thing I think that we do. We wish we could when any of our loved ones are going through really awful times. We do wish we could. But I also think that sometimes, Tina, it takes away, when we do want to take away their pain, there is so much wisdom that comes through them living the pain, through the heartache. You know, I think that there's a phrase that I use in my first book, Perfectly Imperfect, or a poem that I've written somewhere that speaks into our hearts were never meant to be caged. A heart that is not broken is a heart that is not lived. Because when it breaks, that's how all the goodness gets out. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be whole. Your heart is not meant to be whole, because that means that it hasn't lived. It's been put on display, caged behind a glass wall just to be observed. You know, life is about getting your heart broken and bruised so that the muscle gets to be rebuilt, so that the goodness comes out, and so that you can receive. Otherwise, how else does love get in if not through a broken heart?
True.
Let your heart be broken. Oh, it sucks though. It sucks. It sucks. You know, I think about grief, and I've given you a bit of a caveat there that you probably wouldn't have, the audience may not have noticed here, that I said that losing my brother was the hardest thing that I'd done up to that point. And 4 years ago, I left a man that I dearly loved because the relationship wasn't what I needed it to be anymore. And that grief, I know it's not death, but in many ways it was. That grief I chose.
Right.
You know, like
you made it.
Like I made it. You know, when John died, no choice. Like thrusted into it. Death, like that kind of, like death is a choice. There's no choice. It's a choiceless thing. You do not choose to experience that. But when we have to when we have breakups, when we move, when we end things, that grief that I stepped into when that ended my relationship, that was so painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose it. You know, I left that relationship, even though I was in so much pain in the relationship. Either way, there was going to be grief, and I chose to go into the grief of leaving that relationship and ending it, and my heart was so broken in a completely different way than it was with my brother. But in a lot of ways, honestly, I was like, I know I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because once you've gone through one big heartbreak and you know that on the other side, you're okay. To me now, I'm like, I don't like heartbreak. Heartbreak sucks. For grief, for death, for endings, all of it sucks. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. But you know what? There's never been a time in my life when my heart has been broken where I have not become happier on the other side of it.
True.
And so the serenity prayer comes to mind, and I use that a lot in my breakup. And I will recite it now. God grant me the serenity. Yeah. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Well, I think that's when you leave someone, is the wisdom.
That's right.
That you know it's best, right?
Yeah.
What about your parents?
No matter how much it hurts.
How are they doing with everything?
Look, I think it took a long. My parents were split, as I said, not long before Johnny's death. I think that for a long time, I think my dad ignored it. Like he just got to work, just head down, bum up. And it was only years later that he finally realized that there was a whole bunch of grief that he wasn't dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I've watched it radically change my mother. And if I would also say for the better.
Oh, good.
I would say, honestly, I would say for the better. I think that and it's going to sound maybe strange coming from her child, but she's grown a lot. She's matured, and of course, she had shingles. She had no choice but to work through. She was a business owner, so she it's not like she could just take some grief leave. She had to show up and be happy and run a cafe and like serve, and she was in terrible pain, like all of us. And it'll forever be a scar on it. Yeah, it'll forever be a scar on her heart. But I think that she's more alive now, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm sure in the first 5 years it was probably the toughest.
Oh, yeah, and it's still those moments. His birthday was the 14th of this month, actually, in March, 14th of March. I know this won't come out to April, but yeah, his 42nd birthday was just 2 weeks ago. So,
he was a Pisces.
Yeah, he was a Pisces, yeah. So those moments, I think that there's days and certain songs and, I think that for Mum and I especially, it's live. Live. That's what he really taught us.
Do you have a final message you'd like to give to the listeners? You've had so many.
There's been so many already. Yeah, there's been so many. I'm just going to feel into that. Take the risk. Take the risk. We spend so much of our life afraid of getting it wrong, afraid of the pain, afraid of the hurt, and yet that never stops us from getting pain, feeling rejected or being hurt. So it's worth it. Take the risk.
I like that.
And keep taking the risks.
Yeah. I like that. Thank you. I think we could continue on and on and on. It's a very special topic, sibling death. Yeah. I think it should be talked about more, as well as grief. And we certainly try over here to do that. We had a whole series on Christmas time, a series of 3 shows of dealing with grief around Christmas.
Wow.
So of course that was very, I think, useful to many. So if you haven't seen those, everybody, check them out. They're in the December series. And in the blink of an eye, that's how quickly something does change your life. And whether you're prepared or not prepared, the universe doesn't care if you're prepared. Although I would like to tell it, hey, a lot of times, give us a break, because I've had clients who are sitting beside their dying mom and say, I don't know where her accounts are. I don't know where she has her investments. I don't know where this key is. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And she's not telling me. What do I do? Well, we all know what the answer is. You should have done it before. Before that time, because it's too late. So that being said, check out our Facebook group and check that out, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our show. We have special guests on, just like Lunaria here, and I'm sure we'll have her come back and maybe give us some more tips from her second book that she's helped us all with in having to overcome grief from losing a sibling. So thank you so much. Appreciate it so much from you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And everybody, life is short, but we know that we have today. We know we have this moment. So why not start putting things together that that would help those around you, that would be in a especially particular bind by not knowing where your key is. What kind of food does your pet eat? Maybe it's just to go in for surgery, for a hospital visit for a week. Who's feeding your animals? Who's looking after your pets? Who has a key to your house? Who can go in and check? Who can turn the water off? Who can turn the gas off? Do you know where all these shut-off valves are? All of this information is for that wildfire that all of a sudden is over the hill and coming right at you. What about the cancer ward, or like Lunaria here, who you have stage 4 brain tumor? Like, where does that come from? Why? That's the big question we all ask. And of course, grief on the other hand as well. But thank you, everybody, for coming on our show today, and looking forward to next week. I hope to see you there. Please like, share, and subscribe to our show. Until next time, sending my love out to everybody. Stay safe and be kind. Bye.